Philippines, a country with more than 7,000 islands, famous for its beautiful coastlines, diverse culture, and warm people. But behind its peaceful appearance, within society, there are still dark stories that the nation has never been able to forget. For the past 3 decades, the Philippines has witnessed cases that shook public opinion, from the tragic story of Eileen Sarmenta Allan Gomez to the fate-tinged mystery surrounding Father Juan Severino Mallari, who is considered the first serial killer in the country's history. Then, the painful fight for justice of a mother in the Stephen Alston Davis case, followed by the Vizconde Family Massacre, a case known as the trial of the century. And finally, the tragedy of the Chiong Sisters, a case that divided the Philippines for many years. Each story is a slice of society, the mistakes in investigations, power, the desperation of victims' families, and mysteries that have never been answered. Today, we will look back at 5 cases that once shook the Philippines, stories that not only changed the fate of each family, but also left a deep mark on the criminal history of the entire nation. In 2019, the Philippine community erupted in outrage when the media reported that former Calauan Mayor Antonio Sanchez might be released under a good conduct sentence reduction policy. For many people, his name recalled one of the darkest tragedies of the 1990s. News that Sanchez was about to be freed quickly fueled public anger, especially at the University of the Philippines, Los Baños, where the 2 victims had studied. Thousands gathered to protest, demanding that the government stop his release. The public outcry became so intense that the authorities were forced to withdraw the decision. Kay, who refused to disclose their identity, recalled, "To this day, I still remember that morning clearly. Before 8 a.m., the landlady told us that Sarmenta had died. We were asked to go to the UPF station to identify the body. I still cannot bear the memory of seeing her on the morning of June 29, 1993. The pain remains." More than 30 years earlier, in June 1993, Eileen Sarmenta Allan Gomez were still young students at the University of Los Baños. Sarmenta was remembered as an intelligent, gentle girl who was active in volunteer work. Gomez was her companion in many academic projects, kind-hearted and humorous. They could never have imagined they would become the target of a group of criminals backed by the most powerful man in Calauan at the time. At that time, Antonio Sanchez was a mayor with a strong political presence in the region. He was described as temperamental, authoritarian, and surrounded by loyal security personnel. Sanchez's influence was strong enough that many people did not dare confront him openly. On the night of June 28, 1993, Eileen Sarmenta Allan Gomez were stopped by a group of men traveling in a Toyota Tamarao FX and forced into the vehicle. The 2 were brought to Irreversible farm in Barangay Corba, which was believed to be owned by Mayor Antonio Sanchez. When they arrived, Sarmenta was taken into Sanchez's room, while Gomez was left outside, where the mayor's men beat him. Several internal testimonies stated that Sanchez wanted to receive Sarmenta as a gift offered by a subordinate, and that he attacked her right at Irreversible farm. At around 1 a.m. the following morning, Sarmenta, crying uncontrollably, was pulled out of the rest house by Corcolon and Medialda, her hair disheveled. The mayor, wearing only a white polo shirt, appeared and thanked Corcolon and Medialda for the gift. He said, "I am done with her. She is yours." When Sanchez left, Sarmenta continued to be abused by his subordinates. After that, Sanchez ordered 2 men to bring Sarmenta and Gomez back to the Toyota Tamarao FX. On the road leaving Erai's farm, Gomez was beaten until he was nearly unconscious before being taken to a grassy area where Kawit ended his life with a single gunshot and left his body by the roadside. After that, the men continued to abuse Sarmenta when the vehicle stopped in a field in Sitio Paputok. Kawit invited Centeno to join, but Centeno refused because his conscience could not withstand what was being done to Sarmenta. After that, the 6 men decided to kill Sarmenta to cover up their crime and ordered Centeno to dispose of her body. However, Sarmenta's body remained inside the vehicle. On June 29, 1993, after Sarmenta's mother received an anonymous phone call reporting that a Tamarao FX had been abandoned near Calauan, they went to the scene and found Sarmenta's body inside the white vehicle. In an examination, it was discovered that Sarmenta had been forced and violated before she was killed. Meanwhile, Gomez's body was found in a grassy area in another village in Calauan, Laguna. Gomez had been struck by 2 bullets. The autopsy confirmed that both had been brutally killed within just a few hours of disappearing. The following days marked a turning point in the case. 2 of Sanchez's subordinates unexpectedly appeared at the police station and stated that they were part of the group involved in the abduction. Fear, public pressure, and the brutality of the case compelled them to come forward as witnesses. Aurelio Centeno, the most important insider, detailed what had happened at Erai's farm, who was present at the time, when Sanchez attacked Sarmenta, and how the subordinates took turns assaulting her. The case initially placed heavy pressure on investigators due to its severity and the involvement of a high-ranking official. A Toyota Tamarao FX used in the abduction of Sarmenta and Gomez had been surrendered to the police. Police recovered several M16 shell casings from both crime scenes. When they were sent to the PNP laboratory for ballistic testing, the results showed they all came from the same rifle. According to records, that weapon belonged to one of Sanchez's security men. The forensic results were like a missing piece that completed the picture described by the internal witnesses. The investigation did not take many years, but the crucial evidence, ballistics, witness testimonies, Sanchez's local influence, and the matching timeline led to the conclusion that Antonio Sanchez was behind the crime. When arrested, he denied all accusations, claiming he was being framed by political rivals, but the evidence was too clear, and no argument could convince the court. On March 14, 1995, Antonio Sanchez and 6 accomplices were sentenced to 7 life terms for the murders of Sarmenta and Gomez. He was later sentenced to 2 additional life terms in a separate earlier case. In total, Sanchez received 9 life sentences, making him one of the most heavily punished criminals in modern Philippine history. Many thought the case would gradually fade from memory, but in 2019, news of Sanchez's possible release once again ignited public outrage. Protests took place in Los Baños and Manila. Women's rights organizations, students, and even those who had lived under Sanchez's rule spoke out. Public pressure became so great that the government canceled the release order. On March 27, 2021, Sanchez was declared dead at the New Bilibid Prison Hospital. The cause of death was not publicly disclosed. He was 74. But his death did not bring complete relief. For the families of Sarmenta and Gomez, justice had been served, but the pain has never faded. And for the people of the Philippines, the case remains a reminder of abused power, the fragility of justice, and the strength of a community when united in defending the truth. A respected priest in his town, a son who believed his mother had been cursed, and more than 50 parishioners who died in silence over a decade, These are the pieces that remain of the story of Juan Severino Mallari, regarded as the first recorded serial killer in Philippine history, even though the details of his life are buried between colonial archives and local folklore. Mallari was born in 1875 in Magalan, Pampanga, during the period when the Philippines was under Spanish rule. He studied theology at the University of Santo Tomas and completed his studies in 1809, after which he was ordained and became an assistant priest. He held a unique role within the community, both as a religious representative and as a mediator between the locals and the colonial authorities. When he was appointed parish priest of San Bartolome Church around 1816 to 1826, he became the first Filipino to serve as a parish priest in the province. He was regarded as one of the most respected figures in the village, trusted and well regarded by many. Juan Severino Mallari was a talented man with remarkable skills. He had overcome several rejections before finally being accepted as a parish priest. He was also one of the first Filipinos to excel in the art of calligraphy. It makes one wonder how the hands of such a gifted artist could also carry out such crimes. But beneath that talent, historical accounts describe him as showing signs of psychological instability. Mallari believed his mother had been afflicted by kulam, a common belief in Filipino folklore that witchcraft or malevolent forces can cause illness or weakness. According to the few surviving records, he began to believe that the only way to save his mother was to sacrifice the lives of others. That obsessive belief, in an era with no concept of mental health treatment, became the driving force behind a series of killings that lasted for years. While serving in the Magalang parish, documents indicate that Mallari killed at least 57 parishioners. Most of the victims were ordinary community members, people who came to church to confess, to pray, or to ask the priest to perform rites. As colonial authorities tried to identify the person behind these brutal acts, more and more locals fell victim to the mysterious killer who terrorized the streets of Magalang without ever being seen. With no leads or suspects, the investigation eventually stalled, even as the fear of an unknown murderer haunting the town lingered in everyone's mind. In a rural community at that time, deaths like these were not easy to trace, and no one imagined that a priest could be responsible. But as time passed, the unusually high number of deaths drew notice. In a parish not particularly large, the mortality rate became too conspicuous to ignore. Around 1826, Mallari developed an unexplained illness, leading another priest to attend to him. It was during this time that items stained with the victim's blood were reportedly discovered among his belongings. Secondary sources, the few that remain, say that Mallari confessed to killing 57 people as offerings to lift the curse on his mother. The number 57 appears repeatedly in various accounts, even though no formal indictment or complete list of victims survives. Still, the fact that both the Spanish colonial government and the church recognized him as a serial offender suggests this was more than mere local rumor. After his involvement in the killings was uncovered, Mallari was imprisoned for 14 years before being executed in 1840, possibly because authorities needed additional legal review before carrying out the sentence. However, Dr. Luciano Santiago argued that the priest should have been sent instead to the Philippines' first mental health institution. Although detailed records no longer exist, most accounts agree that Mallari was hanged, a common punishment at the time for serious crimes. What makes the case so haunting is not only the number of victims, but the deeply superstitious motivation behind it. Mallari didn't kill for money or revenge. He believed he was performing a ritual to save his mother from dark forces. From a modern perspective, many researchers believe he likely suffered from a serious mental disorder, possibly delusions or schizophrenia, but in a period with no psychological diagnosis, he was viewed simply as a murderer. After Mallari's execution, San Bartolome Church continued to operate, passing through several generations of priests and becoming an important religious landmark in Pampanga. On the list of parish priests, his name appears only briefly, accompanied by a note stating that he killed many parishioners and was executed. For the people of Magalang, Mallari's story carries both the weight of myth and the shadow of history. A priest, someone meant to heal, had instead become the source of terror within his own parish. Today, Mallari's case still appears in historical crime references in the Philippines, and even after more than 2 centuries, it continues to raise difficult questions. Was Mallari a cold-blooded killer or a victim of an unrecognized mental illness? Are his unnamed victims remembered somewhere, or have they faded into obscurity? And most importantly, could this tragedy have been prevented if society at the time had understood psychology and mental health? San Bartolome Church today stands as peacefully as any other, but behind its old stone walls lies a chapter of history that Filipinos still grapple with, a story where faith, illness, and violence intertwine, creating one of the most chilling cases of the colonial era. The case of Juan Severino Mallari may have ended, but its echoes have never truly disappeared. To many, Mallari is the embodiment of cruelty, a priest who exploited his position to take the lives of dozens of parishioners. But to others, he was merely a sick, frail man, pushed into darkness by the torment within his own mind. No matter the perspective, one truth remains. A story born from scattered accounts and fading records eventually formed a complete historical tragedy. It is the tragedy of a man consumed by delusion, with no one to recognize it. The tragedy of a mother whom her son believed was cursed and had to be saved through brutal rituals, and the tragedy of dozens of innocent victims, people who trusted a priest only for that trust to lead them to their deaths. A bloody chapter in Philippine history where the line between faith, illness, and violence became more blurred than ever. Almost 2 decades have passed, but for Margaret Davis, the death of her son, Stephen Alston Davis, has never truly come to an end. The woman, who is now in her later years, still keeps all the investigation files, every note, every crime scene photo, as if it all happened just yesterday. Her 2 grandchildren, who lost their father back in 2002, have grown up in the arms of their resilient grandmother. And it's her persistence that brought this case into the light. Stephen Davis was born in England in 1970. His father died when he was just 14, leaving Stephen as the only man in the family. He was hard-working, quiet, gentle, and especially passionate about computers. His efforts earned him a big job opportunity in Hong Kong when he was only 21. With a high income, Stephen began his journey exploring Asia, and from there, his life took a turn no one could have predicted. Thousands of kilometers away, Evelyn Boho grew up on Daram Island, a poor area with no electricity and no clean water. Her family's hardship forced her to leave home at just 13 years old to find work in Angeles City, a place known as one of the nightlife centers of the Philippines. Life in the bars pushed a girl who was far too young to learn how to grow up in an environment full of traps and temptations. Evelyn carried a dream of changing her life, and the gap between her background and Stephen's would later become a key turning point in this story. Stephen met Evelyn when she was not yet 16. He paid a large sum of money to free her from bar work, an action that came from good intentions, but at the same time created a relationship with a clear imbalance of power. Stephen's family quickly realized their son loved his wife deeply, while Evelyn often kept her distance. When Evelyn was 17, they got married. 2 children were born, Jessica and Joshua, and it seemed like they would hold this small family together. But the cracks, which had already been simmering beneath the surface, started to show more clearly. Margaret felt that her daughter-in-law was becoming lazier and lazier. Not wanting to do housework, Evelyn asked her younger sister to move in. While the sister took care of the household chores, Evelyn often went out to various entertainment spots. The sister herself also began to feel worried about Evelyn's carefree lifestyle. One day, Evelyn revealed to her that she had been having an affair with a Filipino man. Her lover was just a security guard at an entertainment venue. Stephen worked all week, while Evelyn lived in a nice house in Angeles. Every month, Stephen gave her a fairly large amount of money to spend, but she poured the money into going out and supporting her lover instead of paying the family's bills. She even pawned her wedding ring and didn't pay the children's school fees for several months. When he discovered his wife's unusual behavior, Stephen stopped giving her money and told her she needed to learn a trade and earn her own income. Frustrated by her lifestyle, Stephen often stayed at the company's office in Makati City. The office was an apartment unit about a 3-hour drive from their home, with his co-workers. On the night of July 17, 2002, a group of men burst into Stephen's office while he was there with 2 colleagues. They fired several shots at Stephen, then ran off without taking anything. The 32-year-old engineer later died in the hospital. Police suspected this was an act of revenge on Stephen by a business rival. But if that theory was true, why did they only shoot Stephen and ignore his 2 colleagues? The group of attackers moved very quickly and only left a few shell casings at the scene. The police investigation gradually hit a dead end because they couldn't find any solid leads. That reality pushed Margaret Davis to act. She left England and went to the Philippines to find out who had killed her son. As soon as she arrived in Makati City, Margaret saw Evelyn at home, not crying, not shaken, not showing any sign of having just lost her husband. That detail was what first made the victim's mother suspicious. She hired a private investigator and also told the local police that she suspected Evelyn might be connected to the group that killed Stephen. Not only did she hire a private detective to follow her daughter-in-law and the people she often met, Margaret also helped cover the costs so Philippine police could go and speak with potential suspects. Through photos of the men Evelyn frequently met, one of Stephen's colleagues recognized them as the same men who had stormed into the office and shot Stephen. Police arrested 3 suspects: Arnold Adare, Robin Butas, and Alexander Degami. They quickly confessed to killing Stephen. Among them, Arnold Adare was identified as Evelyn's lover. To obtain leniency, Robin Butas agreed to cooperate with the police during the investigation. Robin said that Evelyn told him Stephen was very rich and that she would get all of his assets when he died. He claimed that Evelyn had planned her husband's killing and had given them the keys to Stephen's office. When the 3 attackers carried out the shooting, Evelyn was sitting in a car near the office waiting for them. At this point, Margaret's initial suspicion that her daughter-in-law was behind the murder of her son had effectively been confirmed. Outraged by Evelyn's actions, her own relatives helped Margaret gather evidence to bring Evelyn to court. Evelyn fled before the authorities could issue an official arrest warrant, but she still wasn't able to escape in the end. Prosecutors laid out a series of motives for why Evelyn Bohol wanted her husband dead. She had been unfaithful and no longer loved him. Stephen's demand that she learn a trade and earn money on her own made her resentful, and because Stephen stopped giving her money, Evelyn no longer had the funds to support her lover and maintain her lifestyle. On November 25, 2004, Evelyn was arrested and charged. Throughout the entire trial, More than 14 witnesses testified against her, including relatives. There wasn't a single witness who supported Evelyn, and she was accused of being the one who pointed out the target and created the conditions for the crime to happen. The Philippine court sentenced Evelyn Bohol to 40 years in prison without parole. The judge granted Margaret custody of one grandchild, while the other stayed with the grandparents on Evelyn's side. Later on, Margaret persuaded her in-laws to let her raise both of the children, and they eventually agreed. In order to track down the people who killed her son, Margaret had to sell her house in England and use almost all of her savings. Even so, later she still continued sending money to Evelyn's parents. The case was closed in legal terms, but the consequences were not. Stephen's 2 children were brought back to England and raised by Margaret. Evelyn no longer had any contact with her kids. In one particularly striking moment that was captured on camera, Margaret went into the prison to speak to Evelyn one last time. She didn't get a confession, but in any case, she knew the sentence could never bring her son back. It was only one part of the long journey she had to go through. The story of Stephen and Evelyn leaves a lot to think about. People talk about the gap between rich and poor, the imbalance in international marriages, financial pressure, and the kinds of choices that even those involved sometimes can't foresee the consequences of. The 2 children grew up in their grandmother's care. Evelyn remains in prison, living out the rest of her life behind bars. And Margaret, even after finding what the law calls justice, still has to live with the loss of her son, a pain no sentence can ever erase. In 2006, she wrote a book titled For the Love of My Son to tell the story of her journey to seek justice for him. The Vizconde murders, often referred to as the Vizconde Massacre, were the killings of multiple members of the Vizconde family on June 30, 1991, inside their home in Manila, Philippines. The victims were 49-year-old Estrelita Vizconde and her 2 daughters, 19-year-old Carmela Vizconde and 7-year-old Anne-Marie Jennifer. This case became one of the most shocking crimes in Philippine history, widely described as the trial of the century. The accused were convicted by the Parañaque Regional Trial Court, and the Court of Appeals upheld the ruling. But on December 14, 2010, the Supreme Court acquitted the defendants, ruling that the prosecution failed to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Lauro Vizconde, Estrelita's husband and the father of Carmela and Jennifer, was working in the United States when the murders happened. From that moment on, his life became tied to a decades-long fight for justice. In the early hours of June 30, 1991, the normally quiet B.F. Homes subdivision in Parañaque suddenly became the center of one of the most disturbing cases in Philippine history. When police opened the door of the house at 80 Vizconde Street, they were confronted with a horrifying scene. Inside the master bedroom, the body of Estrelita Vizconde lay on the bed, her body covered in injuries. She had been stabbed multiple times. Beside her was young Jennifer, only 7 years old, also showing severe injuries. On the floor was Carmela, 19, bound and gagged, with signs of having been sexually abused before she was killed. The room was chaotic, but there were no indications of a prolonged struggle. When the family was called in to identify the victims, Rodel, Estrelita's nephew, tried to stay composed as he counted the wounds on their bodies. 2 days later, when Lauro Vizconde returned from the U.S., he could only collapse under the weight of grief. The shock was so immense, he nearly broke down completely. The murders looked like a swift, brutal massacre. Meanwhile, the investigation was plagued with serious issues. The first local police officer to arrive at the crime scene was Gerardo Byong. He allowed the blood-soaked bedsheets, clothing, and other items that could have contained DNA to be collected and burned due to the unbearable stench. He gathered the items himself. Crucial evidence that could have been vital to the case was destroyed. This hasty decision erased much of the physical trace left by the killer. Years later, his actions would become one of the central controversies of the entire case. Under intense pressure from the media, police rushed to find suspects. Within days, a group of burglars known as the Barroso Gang was arrested and charged. They confessed to breaking in and killing the 3 women. But when the family examined their statements, they found major inconsistencies. The suspects claimed they carried the bodies to the 2nd floor, but the house was a single-story bungalow. They said they were chased by the family's pet, but the Vizcondes didn't own any animals. Their confession described a struggle in the living room where they supposedly stabbed Estrelita, yet investigators found no bloodstains there. The family suspected the confession was fabricated. When the gang was presented to the media, they immediately recanted, saying they were tortured and abused by police. With no sufficient evidence linking them to the crime, they were released. The case was closed under a cloud of doubt. Another set of suspects emerged, a group allegedly led by engineer Danilo Aguas, rumored to be the mastermind. They were investigated after an unfamiliar fingerprint was found on a garage light. But once again, there wasn't enough evidence to file charges. Public confidence in the police dropped to an all-time low. Investigators then turned their attention to the Alabang boys, known among the wealthy youth for basketball and drug use. The Vizconde family grew increasingly suspicious of how the investigation was unfolding. They suspected a cover-up to protect powerful individuals. Their suspicions were confirmed when one investigator revealed he had been threatened and ordered to leave certain names out of the case by Freddie Webb, then a congressman of Parañaque and father of suspect Hubert Webb. The investigator also claimed a senior officer ordered him to halt the investigation and hand over all evidence. But with no eyewitnesses, no solid evidence, and no confessions, the case went nowhere. For 4 long years, the investigation stalled, but in 1995, a witness finally came forward, Jessica Alfaro. She claimed she had been a substance user who spent time among wealthy youths in Alabang, and that she had been present at the Vizconde home on the night of the murders. The trial began in August 1995. According to Jessica, the Alabang boys, including Hubert Webb, the son of a senator, had planned to attack Carmela. She described in detail how the group allegedly entered the home, including a sequence of events that led to the deaths of the 3 victims. She even claimed Carmela opened the door because she believed a female friend had come to visit. Her testimony exploded across the media, immediately placing several influential young men under public suspicion. Jessica testified that she knew the suspects and was present at the Vizconde home when the crime happened. According to her account, after a session using illicit substances with the group, Webb allegedly planned to assault Carmela Vizconde. Webb wanted Jessica to join them because Estrellita Vizconde only allowed her daughter to go out and receive female visitors. Jessica testified that when Webb followed Carmela into the dining area, she decided to step outside and smoke. She stated that she saw Lejano and Ventura take knives from a kitchen drawer while the others acted as lookouts. Jessica said that Estrellita was killed before Webb began sexually abusing Carmela. Jennifer, the 7-year-old sister, woke up, jumped on him, and bit him. He then killed the little girl. Jessica claimed that when she returned to the house, she found the bodies of Estrellita and Jennifer on the bed, and Webb was assaulting Carmela on the floor. Lejano and Ventura also joined in before finally killing her. Jessica said that police officer Gerardo Biong had been instructed by Webb to take care of the house. Jessica also said that she happened to see Byung again at the Faces nightclub in Makati in March 1995. They offered her a free plane ticket to the United States to silence her. She added that one of the suspects warned her to keep quiet or be killed, which led her to voluntarily surrender to the National Bureau of Investigation, NBI, for protection. According to her testimony, Jessica was able to identify all the accused by name, including Hubert Webb and 7 others. The defense questioned Jessica's credibility, noting that she admitted she was under the influence of drugs when she allegedly witnessed the crime, and that she had given conflicting statements in her 2 affidavits. Jessica's testimony was supported by other witnesses, including Lolita Beerer, who once lived with police officer Gerardo Byung, and recounted how Byung examined and attempted to cover up the crime. Lolita said she accompanied Byung to the Vizconde home to destroy evidence and retrieve Webb's jacket and the murder weapon. She also testified that Byung received money at a house that she later learned belonged to former Congressman Freddie Webb. 2 maids working for the Webb family also testified that Hubert Webb was at home on June 30, 1991. Around 4 a.m., Gaviola woke up and went to the bedrooms to collect dirty laundry. She said that when she entered Hubert's room, she saw him wearing only pants, awake, smoking on his bed. While washing his clothes, she noticed fresh blood stains on his shirt. After doing the laundry, she returned to the servants' quarters, but feeling uneasy, she went up to the storage room near Hubert's bedroom to see what he was doing. In that storeroom was a small opening leading to Hubert's room, and she saw Hubert and his friends inside. She observed that Hubert looked irritable, restless, and kept pacing back and forth. Security personnel Justo Cabanacan and Normal White also testified. Cabanacan said that Hubert Webb had entered the subdivision where the Vizconde home was located a few days before the massacre, and even introduced himself as the congressman's son. White, on the other hand, said he saw 3 vehicles enter the subdivision on the night of June 29th. White also testified that police officer Gerardo Byung was the first to arrive at the crime scene. When arrested, Hubert Webb presented evidence that he had been in the United States during the entire period when the murders occurred. His passport, immigration records, work receipts, videos, photos, and even testimonies from friends all stated that he was not in the Philippines. The defense submitted documents and presented 95 witnesses, including Hubert Webb and his father, along with other relatives and friends, to support Webb's alibi. Among the evidence was a note verbale from the U.S. Embassy in Manila confirming that Webb had entered the United States from March 9, 1991, until October 26, 1992. On October 1, 1996, Judge Amelita Tolentino accepted only 10 of the 142 pieces of evidence presented by the defense. Prosecutors argued that these documents could have been forged or tampered with. The prosecution claimed that Webb could have flown back to the Philippines, committed the crime, and returned to the U.S. without getting passport stamps, despite no evidence showing that he actually did so. Complicating matters further, the 2 Webb household maids testified that they saw Hubert in Manila that night, contradicting the immigration records entirely. The entire case became clouded with suspicion of interference by powerful individuals. The stark contrast between the 2 narratives, Jessica's vivid testimony versus the Webb family's complete denial, deeply polarized public opinion. After lengthy hearings, the trial court eventually ruled that the Alabang boys were guilty, relying heavily on Jessica's testimony. They were sentenced to life imprisonment. Former police officer Gerardo Biang was convicted as an accessory for burning the bedsheets and tampering with other evidence. He was sentenced to 11 years in prison. Biang was released in November 2010 after completing his sentence. The following years saw continuous appeals, petitions, and disputes. By 2010, when DNA testing was finally admissible in court, the defense requested analysis of the evidence to prove innocence. But by then, the DNA samples had disappeared, no longer in the court's records, nor with the NBI. A crucial chance to uncover the truth was lost due to carelessness nearly 2 decades earlier. Shortly afterward, the Supreme Court overturned the entire conviction. Hubert Webb and the co-accused were acquitted on the grounds that the evidence against them was not strong enough to remove reasonable doubt. Lauro Vizconde, who had spent 2 decades believing he knew who murdered his family, was devastated. He passed away in 2016, never seeing a final conclusion to the deaths of his wife and 2 daughters. The Vizconde Family Massacre remains known as the trial of the century, not only because of its brutality, but also because of the grave investigative failures, the influence of powerful figures, and the haunting, unanswered question: who was the real killer? To this day, no one knows exactly what happened on the night of June 30th, 1991. Was Jessica's testimony the truth, or the product of pressure? Were Webb's documents genuine proof of innocence, or carefully crafted defenses? Were the convicted men truly responsible, or did someone else enter that house that night? Someone who disappeared forever beneath layers of investigative mistakes. 3 lives were lost. A father lived the rest of his life in grief, and the justice system left behind one of the greatest unresolved mysteries in Philippine history. More than 3 decades later, the questions still linger, and perhaps will never be answered. Nearly 3 decades have passed, yet in the Philippines, the story of sisters Marijoy and Jacqueline Chiong has never truly come to a close. The case involves the kidnapping, illegal detention, and abuse of 2 female students. One was later found dead at the bottom of a ravine, while the other disappeared and has never been found. What really happened to her remains unknown to this day. The controversy surrounding the case has never faded. The victim's family believes justice was served, while many international organizations and legal experts continue to question how the trial was handled. Jacqueline is still missing, and although a body believed to be Marijoy was found, doubts about the identification have always lingered. The most prominent defendant, Francisco Paco Larrañaga, now serving his sentence in Spain under a prisoner transfer treaty, has always insisted he was not in Cebu that night. For almost 30 years, the public has been split by a single question: who really abducted and killed the Chiong sisters, and was the story told in court the full truth? Cebu, July 16, 1997. On a heavy, rainy night, sisters Marijoy and Jacqueline Chiong failed to come home at their usual time. Taxis kept driving past without stopping, and that was the last moment many people saw the 2 girls. With the downpour worsening, their mother, Thelma Chiong, assumed her daughters were simply having trouble finding a ride home. She asked her sons, Bruce and Dennis, to go pick up their sisters, but the boys returned without them. Mrs. Chiong couldn't sleep that night. At 5 a.m., the entire family began searching, but found no trace of the girls. Eventually, they sought help from the police, who also searched, but still found nothing. On the morning of July 18, 1997, a local resident reported to police that a young woman had been found dead at the foot of a cliff in Tanawan, Carcar, Cebu. Officer Arturo Unabia and 3 other policemen went to the scene, where they discovered the body of a young woman lying on the ground. A handcuff was secured to her left wrist. The body showed clear signs of severe assault. Her clothes were torn, and strips of tape covered her face and neck. The family later identified the victim as Marijoy based on her physical features and the clothes she had been wearing on July 16th, a bright orange shirt and jeans. However, no DNA testing was performed at the time, and the body was processed rather quickly, which later raised doubts about whether the identification was fully accurate. Even so, throughout the investigation and trial, the courts accepted that the body belonged to Marijoy Chiong. Jacqueline, the other sister, has never been found. When Mrs. Chiong learned the devastating news, she became hysterical, unable to accept that her daughter had suffered such a horrific fate. At that time, public pressure was immense. Cebu was gripped by anger and fear. The media reported the case non-stop, and police faced mounting demands to find the culprits as quickly as possible. While reviewing past records, the name Francisco Paco Larrañaga surfaced as a possible suspect. 2 years earlier, Paco had been accused of trying to force a female student into his car, but the allegation never led to charges due to lack of evidence. Born in 1977, Paco was young, wealthy, and came from a privileged family. The media often portrayed him as a spoiled rich kid, a party-goer who liked nightlife and sometimes acted impulsively. That image heavily shaped how the public viewed him, positioning him as the dark opposite of the two innocent sisters. Once his name appeared in the context of the disappearance, investigators treated him as a key lead. Even though Paco insisted he was in Quezon City, hundreds of kilometers away, with dozens of witnesses supporting his alibi, police attention increasingly focused on him. Then the case took a dramatic turn when Davidson Rusia came forward. On May 8, 1998, Rusia, saying he was haunted by guilt and recurring nightmares, confessed to police that he had taken part in kidnapping the sisters. According to his testimony, he, Paco, and 6 other suspects were all involved. Rusia claimed he saw the group abduct the sisters, detain them, and abuse them before Marijoy's body was thrown off a cliff. As for Jacqueline, he said he did not know what ultimately happened to her. He insisted he stayed in the living room while others assaulted the victims in separate rooms. He also claimed he did not help throw Marijoy off the cliff and left early. But during a brief cross-examination, Rusia admitted he had taken part in abusing Marijoy. According to Rusia's detailed account, on July 15, 1997, at the Cebu Plaza Hotel, he met Rowan, who arranged to meet him the next day for a big event. On July 16th, Rusia waited at Ayala Center until evening, when Rowan and Josman arrived in a white car and told him to come along. Rusia said he noticed a red car following behind. When they reached Archbishop Reyes Avenue, they saw 2 girls waiting for a ride, who Rusia later learned were Marijoy and Jacqueline Chiong. According to his testimony, Rowan and Josman invited the sisters into the car. When the girls refused, they forced them inside. Jacqueline tried to escape but was caught. Rowan used force to render both sisters unconscious and taped their mouths shut. After that, the group went to a house in Guadalupe, where they met the others, Paco Larrañaga, James Anthony, James Andrew, and the group that had been in the red car. According to Rusia, the 2 sisters were taken into separate rooms for about 15 to 20 minutes. Then they were brought back to the vehicle so the group could rent a van. They eventually found one, driven by Alberto, with Ariel as the assistant, and everyone headed south toward Cebu. Inside the van, Rusia said the 2 girls regained consciousness but were still tied up and taped. They were taken to a cliffside area in Tanawan, where the group stopped to eat and drink. Rusia claimed that Marijoy was abused inside the van by several members of the group. Jacqueline was also subjected to similar acts by some of the men. According to Rusia's account, Marijoy was then taken to the edge of the cliff and pushed off. Jacqueline tried to run, but was chased down, beaten unconscious, and brought back to the van. In the end, the group returned to Cebu and dropped Russia off near Ayala Center. Several other prosecution witnesses gave scattered details about seeing the suspects, the Chiong sisters, the white vehicle, or activity near the Tanawan area. When pieced together, the court said these statements supported Russia's story. Meanwhile, the defense presented a long list of alibis. More than 40 witnesses, including teachers, classmates, condominium guards, and instructors from Paco's culinary school, testified that Paco was in Quezon City taking exams and later attending a party on the night of the incident, and that he returned to his condominium at 2:45 a.m. They submitted attendance sheets, receipts, guard logs, and other documents. However, the court found these alibis unconvincing because many of the witnesses personally knew Paco. Airline and airport personnel also submitted flight records showing that Paco did not take any flight on July 16, 1997, nor appear on any arrival or departure list in Cebu on the dates surrounding the incident, except for a Philippine Airlines flight at 5 p.m. on July 17, 1997, from Manila to Cebu. This meant Paco could not have been in Cebu at the time the sisters disappeared. The Supreme Court later ruled that the evidence was sufficient for conviction, even though the defense argued that many unanswered questions still remained. The contradictions between Russia's testimony and the defendant's statements made this case one of the most widely followed trials of its time. Regarding state witness Russia, on August 7, 1998, when prosecutors requested that he be granted immunity so he could testify as a state witness, Paco and brothers James Anthony and James Andrew objected, arguing that Russia was not qualified to be a state witness. On August 12, 1998, the trial court allowed prosecutors to present Russia as their witness, but postponed ruling on his immunity until the prosecution had presented all of its evidence. Russia testified in exchange for full immunity. Although his direct testimony lasted several days, the trial court only allowed Paco's lawyer 30 minutes for cross-examination. In that short time, Paco's lawyer showed that Russia had lied to both prosecutors and the court about his criminal history. Russia claimed he had never been convicted of any crime, but he had prior convictions for theft and forgery in the United States. When confronted with the documents, he fainted in court. Davidson Russia was a convicted offender, a gang member, and had been imprisoned twice in the U.S. for other crimes. When confronted further, he changed portions of his story, raising more questions about his reliability. Still, despite the inconsistencies, Russia's testimony became the central foundation of the prosecution's case. On the final day of testimony, Judge Ocampo temporarily halted the cross-examination. Objecting to the judge's refusal to continue the cross-examination of Russia, the defense attorneys filed a motion to remove Judge Ocampo from the case. When the judge told the defense that he would not step down because he saw no just and valid reason, the defense lawyers withdrew as counsel, saying they would no longer participate in the proceedings. Judge Ocampo found them in direct contempt of court, and they were ordered detained. On November 12, 1998, the trial court issued a consolidated order granting the prosecution's request for immunity and formally recognizing Russia as a state witness. In its written decision, the court emphasized that Russia's testimony was strong enough to justify conviction, even though the defense maintained that a case this serious required more physical evidence, especially since the forensic findings were minimal and many details could not be independently verified. The trial unfolded under intense public pressure, and media coverage played a major role in shaping public perception. According to prosecutors, at around 10 p.m. on July 16, 1997, Paco and 6 other defendants kidnapped the Chiong sisters near a shopping center in Cebu, committed various acts of abuse, and left Marijoy's body in a ravine. In 1999, the trial court found the defendants guilty of kidnapping, illegal detention, and acts of abuse against the victims. Later, on February 3, 2004, the Philippine Supreme Court convicted 7 defendants of murder and sentenced them to death by lethal injection. Although Davidson Rusia claimed he was present during the abduction, he was never charged. Instead, the court granted him full immunity, making him the prosecution's key witness. This decision immediately became a major point of controversy because Rusia, who admitted he had taken part in portions of the crime, was the only person involved who walked away without receiving any sentence. A few months after handing down his verdict in the trial court, Judge Martin Ocampo was found dead, ruled a suicide at the time. However, the deeper circumstances surrounding his death were never fully explained, and speculation continues to this day. When the Philippines abolished the death penalty in 2006, the defendants' sentences were reduced to life imprisonment, but the case did not end there. Paco, who held dual citizenship through his Spanish lineage, became the center of an international dispute. Spain intervened diplomatically, arguing that the death sentence, even though later voided, was inconsistent with their legal principles. In 2009, under a bilateral prisoner transfer treaty, Paco was transferred to a prison in Madrid to continue serving his life sentence. There, he gradually received lower security classifications and joined rehabilitation programs that allowed him to work outside the facility. In 2019, the case returned to national attention when 4 of the 7 convicted men were released early under the Good Conduct Time Allowance law. The decision triggered a massive public backlash across the Philippines. Under pressure, the government revoked the releases, and the 4 men voluntarily returned to prison. Meanwhile, the Chiong family continued to insist that justice had already been served and that there was no reason to revisit the case. Human rights groups and some legal experts, however, argued that too many unresolved issues remained, especially the fact that Jacqueline was never found. Forensic evidence was minimal, and the entire case hinged on a highly disputed state witness. Today, the Chiong sisters case still stands between 2 sharply divided views. One side believes the convictions accurately reflect what happened. The other believes the truth may be far more complicated than the official narrative. With so many unanswered questions, from the identification of the body to the reliability of the testimony, to whether another perpetrator may have been involved, the case is often cited as a lesson on the limits of investigation, the power of public pressure, and the challenges faced by the justice system in moments of intense scrutiny. As for the mother of the Chiong sisters, although Rusia admitted in court that he committed acts of abuse against her daughter, some media reports and independent sources noted that Mrs. Chiong still expressed gratitude toward him for testifying, even bringing him gifts on certain occasions. Some observers found this detail striking, though its true meaning remains open to interpretation. Years after the verdict, the questions remain, and dissatisfaction exists on both sides of the divide. The cases we've just gone through are not only crimes that shocked the Philippines, but also a reminder that behind every case, every verdict, there are losses that can never truly be healed. Even after decades have passed, many questions still remain unanswered. Justice, for some, came far too late. For others, perhaps it never came at all. But continuing to tell these stories is how we make sure the victims are never forgotten, and how the mistakes of the past are not repeated in the future. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video on Dark Crimes Reel.